Hello everyone, welcome to part 3 of the African Sumac build. Just wanted to give you a quick glimpse into the future and show you that where we're going as far as freshly CNC tabletop all the way to a nice and polished tabletop. So the first step is going to be to mix together a 2-to-1 ratio deep pour epoxy. It doesn't necessarily need to be that, but a lot of times tabletop will work, but for this particular case I am doing a clear. So I want it to be as bubble free as possible. So, and this is just a 1-inch thick deep pour epoxy, so it will dry after 24 hours. So you're going to do one side to the next side, and as you see here, as you're doing this, you're going to want to come back and refill after about 20-30 minutes. I use a syringe and it doesn't harden up for like 2 or 3 hours, so you can come back several times and just make sure you get all the cracks filled up as it absorbs that, because that deep pour epoxy is really thin and it's going to absorb into the wood really well. So just come back and make sure you refill, and you can see here just in this time lapse how the cracks start to expose itself again over time. So just keep doing that. In this step I decided to use the scraper as just a test to see how fast it would go, and it's pretty labor intensive actually to do this. It took quite a while. It probably took 3 times as long as just using the sander alone. So I suggest just using the sander, and if don't apply hard pressure at all, and you won't have to worry about your tabletop deforming or getting lopsided or getting divots, especially when you have those witness lines like I do from the CNC machine. You know exactly how much you've taken off and whether it's too much or not. And then when you're done doing it for the first time, you're going to come back and you're going to see that there's still holes, and you just have to keep repeating this process over and over. And you don't necessarily need to use epoxy each time, but you can use CA glue, and in this case I do use CA glue to fill in some of these cracks. So you can see right here, this is a crack that never got filled in all the way, and then right below it there's a spot that never got any to begin with. So you just got to be watchful and just keep looking, and those are the kind of things you really want to actually fill in, because that's how food and grime and dirt and stuff get filled in over the years, and you just want to make sure everything is filled in and crystal clear. And I show here that you'll repeat the same process for the sides using CA glue, and it's actually beneficial that you do it that way, because you're just going to be dripping down the sides if not. And the CA glue just hardens up and sets up really quick, and sometimes you actually just want to put a little CA glue in, use the accelerant, do a little bit more, so on and so forth. So in this particular shot here, I'm using a pick to open up that hole, because sometimes the holes are too small to actually make sure that the air gets out of there. So and you might find yourself having to redo it several times over. Stay vigilant though, and eventually they will all disappear, or enough will disappear that the ones that remain aren't that big of a deal. So even though I don't show it, I've already hit the sides with CA glue, filled in the bubbles as well as I think I could have, and now I have my sander out and I am taking off that CA glue and getting the sides of the tabletop prepped and ready. So and actually I'm using a 120 grit there, not 80. 80 is a little too aggressive for the sides, so I do start with a little higher grit. And pretty frequently you see me blow off the sanding pad, and I use a wire brush to actually clean off the sanding disc, because it gets mucked up pretty quick. So now I'm doing my 120 grit on the tops and bottom. My typical pattern is up and down, left and right, all the way across and all the way up and down. And I do that 3 times, and so up and down, left and right counts as one pass, so just keep that in mind. And I will water pop in between grits, as you see here, and it's just easy. I find it better because you get that wood to kind of raise up a little bit. It does take off a little bit more material, which I kind of like, and it's seems to help with the overall finish. Can't say for sure, but maybe it's psychological, but it's just something I do, and I like to do it anyway just to keep things clean and see the progress of my piece as I go along. And I'm going to step from 120 to 180 to 220, and I make sure that it dries in between those grits. However, once I hit 400, that's when I'm going to start wet sanding. And at this point, I'm just finishing taking it to 220. Now I'm flipping it over, doing the bottom from 120, 180, and eventually 220. Now I'm just getting a good thorough cleaning, top and bottom, all the sides, so that the next step cuts just a little bit better. Okay, so now we're starting the wet sanding at 400 grit, maintaining the same patterns, forward and back, left and right, 3 passes. We will overlap the wood a little bit just to make sure that we always have a nice, clean, smooth transitioning surface. Always make sure to clean up after every pass too, just to get all of that wood and epoxy that comes up. So right here, our end goal is actually going to be similar to this piece of epoxy here. You're going to want to just follow the process. So wet sanding at 400 grit, like you just saw. Next step is 600. Then we're going to go to 800, and then finally 1000. And if you just follow the process, maintain going up and down, left to right, 3 separate times, and the only thing that's really going to vary is going to be the 1000 grit. Now you might need to take a couple extra passes. You might actually find a pretty big pigtail or a swirl that you didn't get out, and the 1000 grit's not going to get that out. If you can see it, the 1000 grit will not get it out. So you might have to step it back down. In a lot of cases, you might have to go all the way back to 400 grit. So, but that's just part of the process to making a pristine, finely polished piece of epoxy. So right here, I'm not exactly thrilled about how my sander is actually doing this bevel. So I opted to start doing some hand sanding. And hand sanding is very different than what the buffer's actually going to do. It's a lot more aggressive in my opinion. Unless you are super lightly touching the epoxy. And in this case, I just went ahead and decided to, instead of having a super sharp edged bevel, I was okay with just dulling it down a little bit and putting a foam backer on it and go ahead and using the normal grits that I do and continuing the sanding like I had before. So, and here I am just about at 1000 grit and cleaning everything up. So here we are at 1000 grit, everything finished up, and it looked pretty good. So the next step is going to be to cover everything up that is wood so that we can continue the buffing stage. And the reason I'm doing this is you do not want any of the polish to remain inside of the wood, and there are ways of getting it out if you didn't cover it up, but sometimes it's easier to do it this way than it is to get that out of the wood pores, and it just depends from wood to wood. Like walnut is very terrible because it's dark and the polish is white, so you do have to be careful. And you'll see here that it's very important that you do not cover up any of the epoxy and you leave a little bit of the wood exposed. That way you can continue to create that nice polished looking surface. And so if you did cover that up, that would show that it was only taken to 1000 grit and wasn't actually polished. So make sure that you do leave a little bit of the wood exposed. So here we are immediately, even after the first pass, you can start to see that the epoxy is already looking good. And we probably do, generally I do about 6 passes. That's kind of the standard, plus or minus maybe 2 passes. In some cases we can get away with only doing it 3 or 4 times. So, and right here, this is, you know, after several passes actually, and there's still some issues, but right here, something you need to be careful of is there tends to be a buildup of compound on the tape. So you need to regularly clean that off and reapply tape. One way I clean off that buffing compound is I use simple green. That really does break down the compound that's on there, all that white stuff. So use that. It's not exactly friendly to all woods either, so you do have to be cognizant of that. But green epoxy here, the wood's going to end up getting really dark, so it really is not that important what we use to clean that off. But we do need to get it off so that you actually get down to the epoxy surface. So you need that buffing compound to completely rub away. So I switched to the other side now, started buffing it. This part is a bit more figurative. There's a lot more cracks and crevices. It actually takes quite a few buffing rounds to get this the way that I really want to get it. So I think I do upwards of 8 different passes on this particular one. Even though you can't quite see it in the video, there are things that I'm not liking, little pigtails that are too big. And you can that's what's good about this, the cutting compound stage here, is you can really get out most scratches that you failed to get out at the 1000 grit, and you may not have noticed. It just might take several passes to get you there. And once again, you know, I had a little hiccup here, and I tried to actually buff it out, and it just made the problem worse. So sometimes you actually just have to take a step back and bite the bullet and go all the way back to 400 grit like I did here. So I did 400 grit all the way on the sides, all the way back up to 1000 grit, and then rebuffed, and all the problems worked themselves out. So now it's time to take all the tape off and get ready for the next step. So right here I'm getting ready to clean off all the extra compound that was left right on the cracks. And I'm going to show here just how well the simple green actually works. And you can see that line that's going on across right there. Of course, I'm not doing a good job of pointing my camera where I'm cleaning, but you'll see here in just a second how well it does come up. And if you've ever tried to clean this stuff off before, it's not fun, and it doesn't want to come out of the pores very well. So, but anyway, as you can see here, it comes up quite easily, and just a little bit of rubbing, and everything will look quite good when you're done. So here we are outside, and just a recap for those who haven't seen the first and second videos. When I purchased this piece of wood, it was super red, and when we surfaced it, it turned white. And I was told by the person that sold it to me that if you just leave it out in the sun, it will redden back up. So unfortunately, I have to take it to a certain level in the process, like adding the epoxy, letting it cure, buffing it and polishing it and all these other things. And so now we're risking damaging the epoxy because it's 107 degrees outside, and I don't know what that's going to do to the epoxy exactly if I leave it out for 2 days on both sides, which is what I wanted to do. And this is 2 hours later. It was getting hot. It got up to 145 degrees. You can see it's already changing colors after 2 hours, but it is hot. So I did decide to put a white blanket over the top of the red one, just hopeful that would keep the temperatures down. It seemed to. It didn't get much hotter than that. However, after about 4 hours in the sunlight, I did start to see some tall tale signs of maybe something going wrong with the epoxy. Nothing unrecoverable, but I did decide that I should probably only put morning sunlight on this thing and not let it get so hot. So that's what I did. And this piece received about 8 hours of sunlight on both sides while I was rotating to make sure the edges actually got equal sunlight. So after about 8 hours, this is where we went from, and then where we went to. And my arrow is pointing to what looks like some splintering in the epoxy. And as soon as I saw that, I turned it all off. So I brought everything inside. Now we're going to apply my first coat of Rubio. It's 3-to-1 mixture ratio. 3 parts your base and then 1 part your accelerant. You don't need the accelerant, but it's nice to have. And here I am just spreading it around with a Bondo spreader. And then I use a white Scotch-Brite pad to mix everything in, and I'm applying the coat very thick because I really don't want to have to do a second coat, simply because it will be very tricky to sand and do it one more time. So it's another reason I like Rubio Monocoat is you can do it in 1 coat. Many people do 2 coats, and I do it 2 coats on occasion, but I find that once I was done with this, that it turned out pretty good. So it's been about 30 minutes, which is about 10 minutes longer than I normally let this sit. But I really wanted it to soak in so that I don't have to do another one. And that's also why I applied a really thick coat as well. If you sit and watch, you'll notice that the Rubio really soaks in and it looks like there's dry spots. So make sure that you're constantly reapplying in that 20 minutes to just make sure it soaks up as much as possible. And then here you see I'm using the blue shop rags to clean everything up, and you can get it on the epoxy, don't worry about that, just make sure you wipe it off. The blue shop rags are really good for doing that. And if you fold them up and unfold them and use every different side of that rag that you can, they'll go a long way and you won't use as many. And another good rule for the Rubio is you can't take too much off, but you can leave too much on. So that's the whole premise behind this. And just make sure that you wipe until there is no oil on your rags. So here's a final look of our piece once I've wiped all the oil off. And everything came out pretty good. Still need that polishing step, but other than that, this is pretty much a done deal. So if you stuck around this long, I do plan to actually give this piece away in a giveaway. And as far as criteria to enter the giveaway, it's going to be probably subscribing to the channel and sharing a link to the channel or the giveaway so that they can do the same thing, and so on and so forth. And the more that you participate, the more likely you are to get this piece and other pieces that I plan to give away. And this is what the piece actually looks like, by the way, after 24 hours. So I just now have it on my own little homemade Lazy Susan and just rotating it around here for a final look-see. And we'll see in part 4 when I start to do the base and legs. Talk to you later.